So, this story didn't happen to me. It actually happened to my very good friend. We'll call him Dan. Dan is a 5'10" male from Maryland. He has a very strange sense of humor and he's very smart, but an all-round good guy. Anyway, we go to the same university. I'm going to tell this story as best as I remember it, so bear with me. Dan moved into his dorm room before his roommate did during our freshman year. Dan had everything all moved in and settled, and just as he sat down, his roommate showed up to move everything in. His roommate, we'll call him Brian, introduced himself and his mother and father, who were helping him move in, much like any other person. Dan decided to help his new roommate move everything in since he didn't know anyone yet, as he was from a different state. So, Dan and Brian's family get down to their car as Brian stayed behind in the room to put things away. This is the first red flag in this story. As they open the trunk, Brian's father looks at Dan directly in the face and says, "Good luck." Dan, thinking he meant with classes, said thanks and grabbed a box. Boy, was he wrong. Dan carried the box upstairs and into the room, where Brian proceeded to flip out. He screamed about how that box had special ingredients for a project he was doing, and Dan probably broke it. Weird, but everyone has their quirks. They finished moving Brian in and his parents said goodbye, and again, Brian's dad told Dan, "Good luck," which is really weird. But anyway, a couple of guys came by the door to ask if they wanted to go and eat, and Dan said sure, but Brian stayed behind to finish unpacking his stuff. While Dan was eating, he gets a call from Brian asking if he would mind if he smoked weed in the room. Dan, being that he wants to work for the CDC, said absolutely not. Brian screamed something unintelligible and hung up the phone. He called him back a few minutes later and asked if he could smoke weed in the closet. Again, Dan said no. Brian hung up without a word, and Dan and his friends decided to go make sure that he wasn't actually smoking weed in the room. When they got there, they found him in the closet eating the weed. Weird as hell, right? Not even close to as bad as this will get. At night, Brian would wake Dan up by standing beside his bed, then asking him one question and one question only. Dan would then answer the question and Brian would walk back to his bed and just go to sleep. This happened every night for a week. At this point, Brian had moved in an entire toolbox of wrenches, screwdrivers, hammers, nails, screws, and an assortment of power tools. Things that weren't needed in a dorm room. During this entire week, Brian never left the room. The only time he left was to eat and go to the bathroom, thankfully. About 4 days before the week where dorm room changes could be made, Brian woke Dan up in the middle of the night and asked him how he felt about gay people. Dan said he didn't really care what anyone did and it was fine with him. Dan woke up the next morning with Brian sitting in a chair directly by his side, staring at him. Dan instinctively yelled, "What the fuck are you doing?" And Brian replied, "I'm starting to have feelings for you. You need to move out. I don't want you getting hurt during what is coming." After that, Dan left and didn't sleep in his room for a couple of days until he could move. Unfortunately, there were no open rooms, so he couldn't move out. During this time, Brian started to follow Dan around. Brian would sleep in the closet with his tools, making something. Dan eventually convinced the head of the dorm to let him move into the now empty room next door after 3 weeks in what he describes as hell. Dan moves to the room next door. No big deal, right? Wrong. 2 days later, Dan gets a knock on the door at 9 a.m. Thinking it was the guy on his floor that he became friends with messing with him, he screams, "What do you want?" and answers the door in his boxers. At the door was 4 state police troopers in full Hamzat gear. The trooper in front said, "Not who you were expecting, huh?" So at least someone had a sense of humor. They let Dan put some clothes on and then let him out the door. At the end of the hallway was Brian in handcuffs. Turns out, Brian had been building pipe bombs and other bombs in the dorm room while Dan was at class. After Dan had moved out, he took over the other bed and closet for his bomb-making activities. The reason the Hamlet team were there was because Brian had spilled liquid mercury all over the floor, and they were afraid that it leaked into the other rooms. When they went through all of Brian's things, they found a plan that also had guns hidden around the city. This kid had planned a massive attack, but he had written Dan's name down with a heart around it and wrote, "Do not kill." Brian is obviously in prison now.
Number 2.
To clarify, I'm a female and I was 20 when this occurred. When I was a junior in college, I transferred from the local community college to a university a few hours away. Due to a communication issue with the admissions office, I had a very short amount of time to find living accommodations. I didn't know anyone in the area, so I looked at Craigslist ads renting out rooms and found a place near my school. I met up with the guy renting out the room, and the house was large, beautiful, and in a very nice neighborhood. Peter, the man who owned the home, was in his early 30s, worked mostly from home in his bedroom office, and was very polite. Peter also rented a room to another university student that was out of town until the semester began. The third roommate was very quiet and nice. For my first week, I was completely alone in the house because Peter had a business trip and the third roommate was not back from his parents' place yet. The house was a little eerie because it was so large and mostly unfurnished. Aside from a lone couch in the living room, a television, and our own personal bedroom furniture, there were 2 entire bedrooms that were completely empty and a locked, empty upstairs that you could only access from an outdoor staircase directly outside of my bedroom. The house had several additions, so the layout was odd. My bedroom was very spacious and had visible writing throughout the room and the closet, which had a broken door that was propped to the side. Peter told me the previous owners used it as an office and the internet wires once ran through my room into the upstairs. I checked the wires because it gave me a bad feeling, but didn't find anything suspicious, mostly because I had no idea what to look for. Once Peter returned, I noticed odd things about him. He would say strange things to me that were oddly sexual, but English was not his native language, so I didn't know if we had a language barrier and I was misinterpreting him. Peter liked to take pictures of me without my consent and post them on Facebook, usually tagging me. At first, the pictures were very mild, such as me sitting on the couch with a friend, or me tapping on my laptop at the new kitchen table. He would turn the flash off, so I never knew that he was taking these pictures, until later when I saw them on the internet. The pictures became more invasive with time. One was with me in a towel when I was walking from my bathroom to my bedroom, and another was of me tanning in my backyard at a time I didn't know he was even home. I found Peter strange and felt uncomfortable around him, but the room was a steal, and I liked the location a lot. Our third roommate shared a thermostat with me that controlled my bedroom, his bedroom, and the hallway that led to the living room. The thermostat was located in my bedroom near my closet, so I always left the door unlocked for him to change it if he needed. One day, Peter was out of town, and the third roommate was changing the thermostat, and noticed something strange behind one of the wires coiled in the closet. He called me over to inspect it, and it looked like a tiny, shiny black ball. I was really afraid it was a camera, and put a piece of duct tape over the ball. I considered saying something to Peter, but didn't want to accuse him of something I really knew nothing about. He also wasn't home yet, so me and the third roommate decided we would ask him about it together when he was home. Peter returned to town 2 nights later on a red-eye flight. I always slept with my door closed, but I left it unlocked in case my third roommate needed it. I woke up the night Peter returned, disoriented, and noticed that the door was open with a small rectangle of light spilling in, and someone was moving inside my room. I stayed very still and tried to make out the figure, which was staying near my closet, directly across from my bed. My eyes were having difficulty adjusting to the darkness, but I could clearly see a person slowly moving throughout my bedroom. The figure left, and I turned the light on and inspected my closet to see that the piece of tape was missing, and not anywhere on the floor like it had fallen. Someone took it. I opened my door and saw Peter walking down the hallway, back to his bedroom. I quietly followed him, and when he walked into his room, I followed him in, and demanded to know what the hell he was doing in my bedroom in the middle of the night. When I confronted Peter, he jumped, obviously surprised that I was in his room. Behind him, on the desktop that he always hunched over doing his work on, was a grainy video image of my bedroom faltering in the dim lamplight I had just turned on. I could clearly see my bed in the frame. Although Peter was a creepy man, he wasn't confrontational, and he immediately began apologizing and trying to explain that it wasn't what it looked like. I don't have the best closing for this experience. I contacted the police and immediately moved in with someone I just met at school. I don't want to disclose anything about the investigation because charges were pressed, but this was several years ago, so I wanted to finally get this experience off my chest and out of my mind. I'm not sure how much footage Peter had of me, and if it still exists somewhere on the internet or in an evidence box at the police station. I'm not even sure when the camera was installed, and if he ever had anything worthwhile of tapping other than a few nude shots of me here and there that he shared with other people through the internet. Little was disclosed to me about what exactly happened, and honestly, I hope I never know. The third roommate moved out the same time I did, and when I drove past the house a few months back, there was a foreclosure sign in the yard. All of this creepy behavior from Peter until the time that I moved out took place within 4 months.
Number 3.
Okay, very short backstory. I became homeless at 16, and through some help I found a place for people between 16 and 25 which gave me a house to stay in, until I could find myself a permanent place. I was put in a rough area close to the center where I could get help and so on. This is the first story of many stories of my roommates at Rush. The first one was my first ever roommate. The house was shared except for the bedrooms, which had fireproof doors with locks on. My room was the larger bedroom, and the smaller room was where my roommate lived. First day of her moving in, our Rush house worker comes around and introduces me to Holly. Holly was a large girl who was about 22 to 24 at the time and played the sweet, "Aw, you're only 16, bless you" kind of role, and said that she would look after me to the worker. I smiled and did it all back, but I already had the feeling that she wasn't someone I wanted to look after me at all. She just had a very creepy feel, like she was just over the top sweet to hide something. After the little introduction, we didn't speak a lot. When I was downstairs, she stayed upstairs, and when I went into my room, she went downstairs. It didn't bother me, since Friday to Sunday she was out getting wasted, so I had the whole house to myself. Anyway, one day I'm sat downstairs watching a bit of Jessica to make myself feel a bit better about the situation I was in, and I hear her stomping downstairs. She opens the door and tries to make some small talk. You know, where are you from? Why did you leave? Blah blah blah. Now, after about 10 minutes of her talking about ex-boyfriends and intimate stuff I didn't care about, she comes out with, "Are you a virgin?" I stared at her for a good 5 seconds and replied, "That's a pretty messed up question to ask a 16-year-old. She laughs it off. "We're both girls, why does it matter?" I get up and reply, "I'm not really into girly chats, do you mind?" She stands out of the way so I can nope it back to my room, thinking, thank the Lord it's Friday. Fast forward to about 1 AM, where I was sat in my bed reading a magazine, when the front door bangs, followed by, "Shit, shh, come into the living room." At this point, I'm just thinking, for the love of God, there goes my Saturday morning of chilling in the house, when suddenly they are talking hushed and fast. I stay quiet on the bed listening when a man's voice replies to the whisper, "I'm not paying 300, if you don't know it's only 150. His foreign accent sounds pissed to say the least, but Holly becomes equally irritated too and says, "I asked, but she didn't say yes or no, which probably means yes. She's only just turned 16. A second man chimes in with the same accent but a more serious tone. "So she's 16? I hear Holly stand up. "Yes, now give me 300 or fuck off. No skin off my nose, there's others out there." As soon as he said 16, I knew he was talking about me. My heart hit the floor, and I sat frozen on my bed praying that I'd locked my bedroom door. I heard her very heavy footsteps slowly coming up the stairs. Every step I felt a cold chill. "Hey, you awake?" she slurred. She did do a pretty good impression of being wrecked, but still I stayed silent, hoping that she'd thought I'd gone out. "Hello?" The handle wobbled, but like a fucking idiot, my door wasn't locked, and it opened. I don't think I've ever thrown myself out of a bed so fast in my life. I slammed that door hard enough that she fell back onto the hall. I thanked Rush for making my side of the door have a twist lock and laid myself flat against the door. She played it off cool. "Oh shit, sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, was just checking on you." Now, my teen angst got the better of me, so I said as confidently as I could, "Go away, and take whoever you're with away too." By this point, she realized that I knew shit was going down, and she started banging her fist on my door, screaming and shouting for me to open it. She started almost begging when the two guys came charging up the stairs. The second man took on the most soothing tone he could. "Hey, we just want to talk about something, that's all. Holly is really upset, and we need your help." "Fuck off, or I'll call the police," is all I could muster back. "With what phone?" Holly laughed, scoffing, and the guys let out a quick laugh too. One of them leant against the door on the other side, and without wavering stated, "If you open the door, it will be better than if you don't open it and we kick it down." I didn't have a witty comeback or even the strength to say no. I was only 16, and if they got in, I didn't stand a chance. Both the guys set off in what I guess was their native tongue. A minute passed of this until I was caught off guard by blows after blows on my door. I backed away and my door makes a noise which says it can't handle two guys kicking it. I scan around the room frantically as I dash to the other side of the room looking for my window keys. I grabbed them from my jeans, fumbled with the window, and screamed like I've never screamed before. They stopped banging and realized that I wasn't worth jail time, I guess, and me screaming like that is going to have everyone opening their front doors to check on what's happening. I hear the stampede downstairs, and the back door swing open and then slam shut. I stopped screaming and slid down the wall into a little ball. I have no idea how long I was sat there thinking what ifs, and then I ran downstairs and chained and bolted the back door and front, and then hid away for a week. Holly and the two men never came back. She didn't leave anything behind except clothes, and I didn't tell Rush House what happened until they came around on a house check and saw the state of my door. By then, it had been a month, and now I'm older and wonder what the actual fuck was happening. Long story short, the only reason my roommate wanted to know so much about me and be friendly was so she could sell me for sex to two blokes.
Number 4.
This is a story about a roommate that my friend and I had many years ago, when we first started college. His name was Bob. We'd been friends with this guy for about a year. He was a character with a lot of interesting quirks, but nothing that seemed really dangerous at first. First of all, he was amazingly creative. He was a great artist and could also pick up a musical instrument he'd never played before and figure it out in a couple of hours, which was very impressive. He had an amazing ability to focus. One crazy thing he could do was to pick flies straight out of the air. He'd get this intense look on his face as he watched the fly. Then, he'd suddenly approach it and bam, pinch it out of the air in mid-flight. He also liked to burn things. Often we'd be kicking back, and then suddenly there'd be the smell of burning hair or something. He would just be there, sitting over the ashtray burning something he'd found, with that same intense look of concentration on his face. Once, someone brought over this big, stand-up cardboard Easter bunny. We didn't have it for an hour before we noticed smoke coming from the front yard. There he was, watching the bunny burn. In retrospect, there were some things that indicated something was wrong with him, beyond his quirky behavior. A couple of times he accidentally hurt my dog, shut his leg in the door, or carelessly grazed him with a lit cigarette. Once, when he was cat-sitting for a girlfriend, the cat mysteriously disappeared. A girl I knew claimed that he had tried to bury her puppies under a shed. They liked to crawl under there to sleep, and he filled in the entrance. But he and she had kind of a weird history, so I believed him when he denied it. So, one day, some friends of ours came by the house while we weren't home. They caught him picking up and throwing one of our dogs, hurting her for fun. I confronted him over this, as I was naturally pretty upset. He told me in a completely matter-of-fact way that he decided to conduct an experiment that he'd been working on for a while. He wanted to see if he gave my dogs only bad attention and pain, whether they would learn to enjoy it. He acted like this was a totally rational explanation. What the actual fuck? I told him this was crazy and asked him where he'd come up with such a horrible excuse for torturing my dogs. After some argument, he admitted that while he was doing an experiment, he really did enjoy seeing the look or fear in their eyes when he hurt them. He also admitted that he'd had similar desires to do the same to women, though he hadn't acted on them. Again, with these confessions, he didn't seem at all remorseful. He said it all in the same tone that you'd typically tell someone you decided to take some painting classes, or something mundane like that. Needless to say, we made Bob move out and stopped hanging out with him. I don't know all the things that he did to our dogs when we weren't home for the 6 months that he lived with us. I did hear from a mutual friend that when he found out that our dog had puppies, that he was surprised that she could actually get pregnant after what he did to her. Pretty disturbing, and I don't really want to find out what he did to her. I wouldn't be surprised to see his name in the papers as being some serial killer or something someday.
Number 5.
When I was accepted into a college that was far from my hometown, I didn't really know anyone else who lived there. The college I went to didn't have dorms, but they did have apartments that they suggested students live in due to their proximity to the college. I was pretty broke at that point, plus I wanted to meet some new people right away, so I chose my apartment largely due to a roommate matching service they had. Basically, you fill out a questionnaire about your demographics and hobbies, interests, and the service would match you with roommates that were compatible with you. Mind you, I chose this particular apartment despite the 1-star reviews I saw across the board online. I mean, they were under new management and it was only a year lease. It couldn't be that bad. I was matched with another guy in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. I was so excited to move in and meet him. I moved in a few days after the lease started, probably about 3 weeks before school started, and already began regretting my decision. The apartment was shit and smelled like mold and old cigarettes. In fact, there was a used ashtray on the coffee table when I first got there. My new roommate didn't show up for about a week. When he finally did show up, I found out that he was about 35 years old and didn't even go to my school. He was pretty scruffy and smelled like old cigarettes and BO. Eventually, I found out that he used to be homeless and took out student loans to afford the application fee and the first few months of rent, but he never enrolled in classes. After the first few months, he stopped paying rent and it took about 6 months for the property owners to finally evict him. While he lived in my apartment, he never changed his clothes. He always wore the same beat-up looking camo pants and stained dirty wife beater. I even offered him some clothes that I was getting rid of at that point, which would have fit him fine. He was content though, so whatever. He would also have a lot of his old roommates over from when he lived at the homeless shelters. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to come home to a random person doing laundry, even when my roommate wasn't home. When I would have a guy over to hang out with in my room, I'm gay by the way, he would watch us walk from the front door to my room through a crack in his door just wide enough for me to see the creepiest look on his face. Literally every single time. Needless to say, he gave me the creeps. A few months after school started and after I was noticing his creepy behavior more and more, I was in my room asleep with a guy I was talking to at the time, actually still my boyfriend to this day, when I suddenly hear a knock on my door. I look to the clock and it's about 3 in the morning. I get up to see what whoever it was wanted and then open my door, only to be met with by this random dirty old naked guy. He says that he's a friend of my roommate and thought my roommate was in my room with me. I flip the fuck out. Obviously my roommate isn't in my room with me. In order to get into my apartment, my roommate would have to let him in, and the apartment isn't very big, so it wasn't like my roommate could have gone somewhere else that his friend wouldn't know he was. He was either in the living room or in his room. I throw this dude out, him being butt-ass naked, and let myself into my roommate's room. This is the first time I've ever been in there, mainly because I have no reason to associate with him, and he's sitting in the corner doing absolutely nothing with his lights off. Almost as if he was waiting for me to come in there. I ask him about everything that just happened, and he tries to play dumb like he didn't even know the guy. Someone had to let him in, and it wasn't me. I drop it, begrudgingly, because the eviction notices are piling up on his door. I figure it's just a matter of time until he's gone. In the meantime, I see the naked dude randomly in the apartment doing laundry a handful of times when I would get home from class. Finally, my roommate is evicted, and I think I'm done with that, and maybe we'll get another roommate that is actually my age or cool. A few weeks go by that are more or less quiet. Then, one day, I hear a knock at the front door during the day. When I answer it, I see the random naked dude standing there, thankfully clothed this time, with a trash bag full of what looks like disgusting laundry. He tells me that my roommate said it was cool if he came to use the washer, and starts to walk forward like he owns the place. I step in front of him and tell him that his friend doesn't live here anymore, and no, he can't use my washing machine. I then close the door and lock it and go back to my room. About 20 minutes later, I keep hearing a random noise from my balcony. I lived on the 3rd floor, so I figured it was just a squirrel or a bird out there just scratching around. I keep hearing the noise, so I decide to investigate and see that the homeless guy is trying his best to climb up to my balcony. I told him I was calling the cops, but obviously by the time they got there, he was gone. That same day I went to the property manager and asked what kind of roommate matching service works like that, and demanded to get out of my lease. After some heated discussion, I persuaded her that it was probably in her best interest to just let me leave. I found a nice 1-bedroom and never looked back. Hey guys!